Hi, friends. I'm Scott Giles, a life coach and a certified consulting hypnotist. Every Saturday afternoon, I shoot a short 5 or 10 minute video on some aspect of coaching or hypnotism, and I try to make the subjects interesting. Today, I want to talk about the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the later development of physical and emotional problems. Now, I want to give a trigger warning. If you have such experiences in your childhood, you might be disturbed about some of what I'm about to share. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself in deciding whether or not you want to watch this video. But I think you'll find this information interesting. I certainly did, and I also find it kind of disturbing. Now, I should mention, as I'm seeing some names appear, I shot a version of this video a few minutes ago, but it turned out that there were some connection problems, so I'm simply reshooting it. And hopefully the gods of the internet will be gracious and we'll get the video done properly. Now, the entire field about researching adverse childhood experiences was launched by a wonderful, significant study that was funded by the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. If you're curious, Google it. You'll find that to be very interesting. Investigators went to Kaiser Permanente, one of the big managed care organizations in California, specifically San Diego, and sampled 17,000 plus individuals, asking them about their early childhood experiences and then comparing that to their downstream development of chronic psychiatric or physical problems. The results were astounding. In this non-clinical general population chosen at random, the rates of child abuse in the form of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect were remarkably high, depending on the category from 8% to 25%. One child in 4 tends to have this in his or her background, which is astoundingly higher than I think most of us ever expected. Now, early in my career, because I work extensively with people who have chronic diseases, I noticed that the rates of child abuse or neglect seem to be much higher in my clientele than in the general population. And I think that was an early indication about what the ACE study actually did show. Now, if you're curious, I'm going to give you the information you need to compute your own ACE score. But your ACE score is the single greatest contributor to your risk for psychiatric and medical disorders, more than any other single factor, including your genetic heritage. It increases your risk for heart disease, stroke, depression, drug abuse, suicide, and a whole raft of others. And if you add people who have addictions, it's even higher. Now, there's been an important study that has come out by Dr. Lippitt and Nemanoff, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, January of 2020. The devastating clinical consequences of child abuse and neglect, increased disease vulnerability, and poor treatment response in mood disorders. I'll read you the abstract. A large body of evidence has demonstrated that exposure to childhood maltreatment at any stage of development can have long-lasting consequences. It is associated with a marked increase in risk for psychiatric and medical disorders. This review summarizes the literature investigating the effects of childhood maltreatment on disease vulnerability for mood disorders, specifically summarizing cross-sectional and more recent longitudinal studies demonstrating that childhood maltreatment is more prevalent and is associated with increased risk for first mood episode recurrence, greater comorbidities, and increased risk for suicidal ideation and attempts in individuals with mood disorders. It summarizes the persistent alterations associated with childhood maltreatment, including alterations in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and inflammatory cytokinins. Many diseases, including cancer, have an inflammatory component, and cytokinins are what the body produces as part of that inflammatory response, which may contribute to disease vulnerability and a more pernicious disease course. Now, that's all pretty scary. To learn your ACE score, you give an answer to 10 questions, and I'll share them momentarily. For every answer that is true, you score 1 point. If your total score is 4 or higher, you are at significantly increased risk of developing both a psychiatric problem or a chronic medical problem even decades later downstream. Okay, here we go. There are 10 questions. 5 are personal, about physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, and emotional neglect. And 5 are related to other family members. Now, of course, there are other traumas that people can experience, but the ACE study just looked at these 10. So, for all these questions, you're answering prior to your 18th birthday, did. 1. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? If yes, score 1. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? If yes, score 1. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If yes, score 1. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? If yes, score 1. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you and take you to the doctor if you needed it? If yes, score 1. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? If yes, score 1. Was your mother or stepmother was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes often or very often kicked, beaten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? If yes, score 1. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or who used street drugs? If yes, score 1. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? If yes, score 1. Did a household member go to prison? If yes, score 1. Count up the numbers of ones that you've scored. If you're 4 or higher, you are at increased risk of psychological and physical problems downstream. My personal score is 6. Here's some numbers that are a little bit disturbing. If your score is more than 4, the likelihood of you developing chronic pulmonary lung disease increases 390%. Your likelihood of contracting hepatitis increases 240%. Your likelihood of coming down with clinical depression increases 460%. And your likelihood of attempting suicide increases 1,220%. Scary, huh? I had someone in my clinic this morning. I run 4 free clinics for cancer patients in an arc around Chicago. In my clinic this morning at Little Company of Mary Hospital, I had someone in the group whose score was 8. And she had cancer. Cancer is increasingly understood as an inflammatory condition. So, my advice: if you have an ACE score 4 or higher, I recommend 2 things. First, get yourself into therapy or something like therapy, even if you think you don't need it, because you got to do something to deal with this psychophysiological shadow that's been cast in your mind, this kind of a hex from your family of origin. And you need to deal with it before it deals with you. And second, be sure you share this information with your primary care physician, because you need to be scrutinized more carefully than the rest of the general population for these particular medical risks. So I strongly recommend you do these two things. I have. Hey, thank you for your attention. I see that the video went through fine. That's good to know. I'll be back next Saturday with yet another talk on a different topic. If you're curious about my work, please feel free to check out my website or to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to hear from people. And you take care and do well. Bye-bye.